Millionaire steps into a contract marriage to rescue his family's fortune, but discovers his true love. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The afternoon sky above Manhattan was gray, heavy with rain that had been threatening all morning. Inside the glass tower of Ward Enterprises, the city's hum softened to a faint whisper. Ethan Ward stood before the tall windows of his corner office, his reflection merging with the skyline that his family had ruled for 3 generations. The phone on his desk kept ringing, but he did not move. He had spent his entire life cleaning up other people's mistakes, his father's debts, his board's greed, and now the final blow. A hostile takeover that could erase the Ward name forever. His lawyers had offered him one last option, an old clause hidden in the company's founding agreement, one that required him to be married to maintain full control of the family trust. He had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find a wife. The knock on the door was soft. His assistant, a middle-aged woman who had seen him through every crisis, stepped inside. "Sir, Miss Lena Gray is here for the design contract." Ethan turned slowly. "Send her in." Lena entered the office holding a portfolio close to her chest. The rain had left strands of hair clinging to her cheeks, and her black coat looked far too thin for the weather. Still, there was something steady about her honest eyes, a voice that did not tremble even when she faced a billionaire. "Mr. Ward," she said, "thank you for seeing me. I understand you were looking for an interior designer for the new foundation building." Ethan studied her for a long moment. The truth was, he had forgotten about that project. But as he looked at her, an idea began to form, sharp, absurd, but irresistible. "What if," he said slowly, "I offered you a different kind of contract?" Lena frowned. "I do not understand." Ethan walked to his desk, picked up a single sheet of paper, and placed it between them. The document bore the Ward family crest and a single line typed in clean serif font, "Marriage agreement." "You will marry me," he said quietly, "for 6 months. In return, your father's medical debts will be paid in full, and your studio will receive the grant it needs to survive." The silence between them was thunderous. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline. "You are joking," Lena whispered. "I never joke about business," Ethan replied. Her breath caught. "And what happens after 6 months?" He looked at her, his voice flat. "We both walk away richer. On paper, at least." For a long moment she said nothing. The rain pressed harder against the glass, and somewhere in the city below, a siren wailed like an omen. Ethan waited, calm on the outside. But something deep inside him shifted an awareness that this deal, unlike every other, might cost him far more than money. The following morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed in cold sunlight that glinted off every glass tower. The streets below Ward Enterprises moved with their usual rhythm of ambition and noise, but inside Ethan Ward's office, the air was thick with silence. The contract lay on the polished mahogany desk, untouched since last night. Ethan had not slept. He had spent most of the night in his study at the estate, staring at the company's financial reports, pages filled with red numbers and urgent memos from the board. Every warning was the same: if he failed to secure the Ward family trust within 14 days, control of the company would fall to his cousin Adrian, a man who valued profit over legacy. When the office door opened, Lena Gray stepped inside once more. She looked tired but resolute, her hair pulled back, the same portfolio clutched to her chest. Her eyes flicked briefly to the contract on the desk, then back to him. "I read the proposal you sent," she said quietly. "I am here for one reason, only to understand why you would ask me, a stranger, to marry you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You are not a stranger, Miss Gray. You are honest, discreet, and you have no connection to the Ward family or the press. That makes you the safest choice." Lena gave a small, humorless laugh. "Safe choice? You make it sound like you are hiring a bodyguard, not a wife." He did not smile. "I am hiring a solution." Her jaw tightened. You think marriage is a business deal? For people like me, it always has been. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried something deeper, a fatigue, born of too many betrayals. If I lose control of Ward Enterprises, hundreds of employees will lose their jobs, and my mother's charity foundation will disappear. I am not asking for love, Miss Gray. I am asking for time. Lena's hands trembled slightly around her portfolio. And what happens to me after those 6 months? You will receive full financial security, Ethan said. Your father's medical bills will be cleared. Your design studio will have funding for 1 year. After that, our marriage will end quietly. No press, no scandal. She stared at him, torn between disbelief and the faint spark of something else, pity, maybe even admiration. The man in front of her was cold, yes, but also desperate in a way that revealed something human beneath the surface. I do not trust easily, she said. I do not expect you to. He slid the document toward her. Read it carefully. Every condition is written in plain language. There are no hidden traps. Oh. Lena sat across from him, opened the folder, and began to read. The first page listed her responsibilities. Public appearances, as Mrs. Ward. Confidentiality regarding all private matters. And a non-disclosure clause extending for 5 years after the contract ended. The second page detailed her compensation, each number written in clear, legal phrasing. But it was the third page that caught her attention, a section titled Restrictions. She read aloud, her voice unsteady. Neither party shall engage in personal or romantic conduct with third parties during the term of the agreement. Her eyes lifted to his. So it is a marriage in name only. Ethan nodded once. That is correct. Lena's voice dropped. You mean a life lived behind glass, pretending in public and living in silence at home. It will not be forever. She closed the folder, her pulse quickening. You sound so certain. I have lived my entire life inside contracts, he said softly. I know how to end them. There was a pause long enough for both of them to hear the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Lena stood. I need time to think. Ethan did not stop her. You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires. She nodded, turned, and walked out of the office without looking back. The following evening, Lena sat in her small apartment above a coffee shop in Brooklyn. The contract spread open on the kitchen table. Her father's medical bills were stacked beside it, each one a silent reminder of reality. The sound of the street drifted through the cracked window music from a passing car, laughter from a couple walking home. It all felt far away. Her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. Balance due by Friday. Lena pressed her palms against her face. She had promised her father she would not give up his treatment, not after all the surgeries that had already drained their savings. He was stable for now, but without continued care, that could change within months. She looked down at the contract again. 6 months, 180 days. It was not forever. She imagined Ethan Ward calm, unreadable, the kind of man who could make or break empires with a phone call. He did not seem cruel, only distant. A man made of logic, not emotion. Perhaps that was what made the offer even more dangerous. When the rain began again outside, Lena reached for her pen. Her signature came slowly, her hand trembling slightly. But when it was done, she sat back and exhaled. Her life had just changed with one name on a line. 2 days later, Lena stood in the marble lobby of Ward Enterprises, clutching her copy of the contract. A car waited outside to take her to the Ward estate. The driver, an older man in a dark suit, greeted her politely. Mrs. Ward, Mr. Ethan is expecting you. The words sounded strange, almost foreign. Mrs. Ward. She followed him into the sleek black sedan, watching as the city faded into a blur of lights and glass behind her. The Ward estate sat on the edge of Long Island, a grand stone mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and high gates. The kind of place built to impress, but not to welcome. When the car stopped before the wide staircase, Lena hesitated before stepping out. The front doors opened before she could knock. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, greeted her with a stiff smile. Good evening, ma'am. Mr. Ward is waiting in the drawing room. Lena followed her through long corridors lined with portraits of generations of Wards, every face painted in shades of pride and distance. The scent of polished wood and expensive candles filled the air. Ethan stood by the fireplace, his posture immaculate, a glass of water in his hand. He looked at her briefly, then at the envelope she carried. "You signed it." Lena nodded. "I did." He gestured toward the table. "Then let us make it official." She set the signed pages down, and he added his signature beside hers, his pen strokes precise and deliberate. When it was done, he closed the folder and handed her a small velvet box. "This belongs to you now." Inside was a simple gold ring, no diamonds, no engraving, just elegance in its restraint. Lena looked up at him. "You did not have to do this. It is part of the illusion," he said. "People will expect you to wear it." "No." She slid the ring onto her finger. The metal was cool against her skin. Ethan's expression did not change, but for a brief moment, something softened in his eyes. "Welcome to the Ward estate, Mrs. Ward." The title still felt unreal. "Thank you, Mr. Ward." "Ethan," he corrected quietly. "At least when we are alone." For the first time since she met him, Lena smiled just barely. "Then you should call me Lena." He gave a single nod, the faintest hint of warmth in his voice. "Good. We understand each other." The grandfather clock struck 9, echoing through the vast halls. Somewhere beyond the windows, thunder rumbled again over the Atlantic. Ethan turned back toward the fire, his silhouette framed by the golden light. "Tomorrow, the world will believe we are husband and wife. I suggest you rest tonight. It will be a long 6 months." Lena looked down at the ring, its surface catching the firelight. She had entered a contract with no love clause, but deep inside, she could already feel something stirring, something that did not belong in the fine print. And Ethan, though he would never admit it, felt the same unease. For the first time in years, a deal he made did not feel like control. It felt like risk. And for a man who had built his life on certainty, that was far more dangerous than any loss of fortune could ever be. The next morning began with the sound of rain on the windows again, soft and steady. The Ward estate was quiet, the kind of silence that felt rehearsed, as if the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. Lena woke in a guest room far larger than her entire apartment in Brooklyn. The ceiling rose high above her like the inside of a cathedral, and the sheets smelled faintly of lavender and starch. For a moment she did not move. The events of the previous day ran through her mind like a film she was not sure she had agreed to star in. The car, the mansion, the signature on that paper, the ring that now glinted on her left hand. She was Mrs. Ethan Ward, by law, if not by love. Downstairs, the housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, greeted her, with a tone that hovered between politeness and suspicion. "Good morning, Mrs. Ward. Breakfast is served in the east dining room." How? The east dining room was larger than the entire floor of Lena's old building. A single long table stretched from one end to the other, its surface gleaming under a chandelier that looked like a waterfall of light. At the far end, Ethan was reading the morning paper, a cup of coffee untouched beside him. "Good morning," Lena said softly. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Good morning. I hope the room was comfortable." "It was," she answered, "though I almost got lost trying to find the stairs." A flicker of a smile passed over his lips, gone as quickly as it came. "The house can be confusing. You will get used to it." Mrs. Dalton poured her a cup of coffee and stepped back. The aroma filled the air, strong and dark. Lena wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth. "I suppose there are rules I should know," she said after a moment. Ethan folded the newspaper and set it aside. "A few. Appearances matter more than truth. That is the nature of this arrangement. You will accompany me to public events, charity dinners, and the upcoming board gala. Beyond that, you are free to manage your time as you wish. The staff has been informed of your position. They will treat you with respect." She looked at him carefully. "And you? How will you treat me?" He met her gaze directly. "As an ally, not an ornament. I do not expect you to play the fool for society's sake." Oh, the answer surprised her, but before she could respond, he rose from his seat. "I have meetings in the city. The driver will take you to the studio later if you wish to continue your design work. I am not here to cage you, Lena." He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "And one more thing," he said. "There is a press statement being released this afternoon. It will announce our marriage as a private ceremony. You may be asked to smile for photographs in the coming weeks. Practice if you must." When he was gone, the silence felt heavier than before. Lena spent the rest of the morning walking through the estate. The walls were lined with portraits of the Ward ancestors, their eyes following her with a kind of silent judgment. She stopped before one, the image of a woman with kind eyes and pearls at her neck. The plaque beneath read Margaret Ward, founder of the Ward Foundation for Children. Lena had read about her in an article once, a philanthropist who built schools in underprivileged neighborhoods. Ethan's mother. There was warmth in the woman's painted expression, the kind that seemed absent from her son's world now. When Lena reached the garden, the rain had stopped. The air was cool and smelled of wet grass. She found herself standing beneath a sprawling oak tree, watching the staff trim the hedges. The estate was flawless. Every blade of grass measured, every petal arranged. Yet something about its perfection felt lonely. By afternoon, she returned to the house to find Ethan home, earlier than expected. He stood in the library, tie loosened, his phone pressed to his ear. His tone was sharp, controlled, the voice of a man used to command. "I said no," he told the person on the other end. "We are not selling the property. I do not care about the short-term gain. The Ward name stays intact." "Oh." When he noticed Lena standing in the doorway, he ended the call. "I did not hear you come in." "I did not mean to interrupt," she said. "I was exploring the garden." "Good. It needs life again. My mother loved that garden." She hesitated, then asked, "Was that her in the portrait near the stairs?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. She built everything that matters about this family. The rest of us just inherited the shadow of it." "Oh." There was something different in his voice now, quieter, touched by regret. Lena stepped closer but kept a polite distance. "You speak of her as if she is still here." "She is, in a way," he said. "Every decision I make is because of her." The room grew still. The fireplace crackled softly, filling the silence with its gentle rhythm. "I do not believe this marriage is only about business for you," Lena said finally. "You could have chosen anyone, an heiress, a socialite, someone from your world. But you chose me. Why?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes steady. "Because you do not belong to my world, and that is precisely why I can trust you not to destroy it." His words hung in the air like a confession and a warning all at once. Lena felt a chill run down her spine, though the room was warm. Later that evening, when she returned to her room, she found a small envelope on the nightstand. Inside was a handwritten note in Ethan's neat script. "Dinner tomorrow, 7 o'clock. The first of many appearances. Wear something you like. E." Lena held the note for a long time, the gold ring on her finger catching the lamplight. Somewhere beneath her uncertainty, a spark of curiosity began to grow. She had entered this house as a contract, a means to an end. But each word, each glance from Ethan Ward, made her wonder if she had stepped into something far more unpredictable. And in the quiet of that vast house, she realized that the distance between business and emotion could vanish faster than any signature on paper. The next day arrived with a sky of muted gold and the faint hum of wind through the garden trees. The mansion was no longer silent. Workers moved briskly in the courtyard, arranging floral decorations and hanging lights for the quiet, private ceremony that would officially seal the marriage before the legal witnesses. Lena stood before the mirror in her room, her reflection framed by the soft glow of morning. The gown she wore was simple, a white satin dress that brushed the floor and shimmered faintly when she turned. It had been chosen by Mrs. Dalton, who insisted that appearances mattered even in a marriage of convenience. Lena smoothed the fabric nervously. It felt unreal, like she was about to play a role in someone else's story. The ring on her hand glinted against the pale silk, reminding her of everything this agreement represented. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Dalton entered, her posture as upright as ever. "Mr. Ward is waiting in the main hall," she said. Her tone was formal, but her eyes softened just slightly when she looked at Lena. "You look lovely, ma'am." "Thank you," Lena said quietly. The hallway stretched long and bright as she descended the marble staircase. Ethan waited at the bottom, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him with effortless precision. His expression was calm, but his eyes revealed a tension he never showed at the office. "Are you ready?" he asked. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," she replied. 2 witnesses stood nearby, Ethan's attorney and the notary public. No guests, no family, no music. The ceremony began with a few formal words, the air filled with the faint echo of rain returning outside. Ethan's voice was steady as he recited the brief vows required by law. When it was Lena's turn, she hesitated for just a heartbeat before repeating the same words. The ring she already wore needed no replacement, yet Ethan still took her hand and held it for the first time, pressing his thumb lightly against her fingers as the notary declared them husband and wife. The sound of the pen signing the document was small, almost delicate, but it felt final. Ethan met her chaza. "Welcome to your new life, Lena." She tried to smile, but the weight of those words settled deep inside her. This was not a fairy tale. It was a deal sealed by desperation and duty. After the ceremony, they moved into the main dining room where a small table had been set for two. No photographers, no music, just the quiet hum of the rain and the clinking of fine china. A candle flickered between them, its light reflecting in Ethan's eyes. He raised his glass slightly. "To clarity, and to peace." Lena lifted hers. "To survival," she said softly. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Then Ethan spoke, his tone softer than she expected. "I know this must feel strange. You did not ask for any of this." "No," she said, "but I accepted it. We both did." He looked at her with something close to curiosity. "Most people would have said no." "Most people do not owe what I owe," she replied. "When life gives you no choice, you stop asking what feels fair." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other better than I thought." The sound of thunder rolled faintly outside, and for a moment neither spoke. The air between them was fragile but alive, like a bridge made of glass clear, uncertain, and impossible to cross without care. After dinner, Ethan escorted her through the hallways of the mansion. The lights were dimmed, casting a warm glow over the art and marble floors. He showed her the gallery, the study, and finally a room lined with books from floor to ceiling. "This was my mother's library," he said. "She believed books made a house human. I am not sure she was wrong." Lena walked slowly among the shelves, running her fingers over the spines. She must have loved stories. She loved people, Ethan said. Stories were just how she understood them. He stood near the window, his reflection overlapping with hers in the glass. The rain outside streaked the world into silver lines. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked quietly. Ethan's eyes shifted to hers. "Every day, but wishing does not change contracts, or people." Lena nodded. "No, but it changes what we hope for." He studied her face, then said softly, "You speak like someone who still believes in hope." "Maybe I have to," she said. "Otherwise, what would be the point?" Ethan said nothing more, but there was a faint change in his expression, something almost like respect. When the clock struck 9, he walked her back to her room. At the door, he paused. "If there is anything you need, let Mrs. Dalton know. The West Wing is private, but the rest of the house is yours to use." "Thank you," Lena said. "Good night, Ethan." He inclined his head. "Good night, Lena." When the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The room was quiet except for the rain tapping at the window. She looked down at her ring, the light glinting off its surface like a promise she did not fully understand. Across the hall, Ethan stood in the corridor for a long moment before returning to his study. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the contract folder lying on his desk. It should have felt like victory control restored, legacy preserved, but instead, he felt an unease that words could not name. In another room of the same house, Lena sat by the window and watched the rain slide down the glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again. She told herself this was just a business arrangement, nothing more. But in the quiet rhythm of the storm, she felt the first faint shift of something else, something that neither of them had planned for, yet both had unknowingly invited. That night, the mansion slept under the sound of rain. Two strangers bound by a contract neither could fully define. And somewhere between duty and chance, the story of their false marriage began to feel a little too real. The morning after the ceremony dawned clear and cold, the rain finally gone. The Ward estate stood quiet beneath the pale sky, its gardens still glistening with dew. Lena woke early, her body still adjusting to the strange rhythm of this new life. For the first time in days, sunlight spilled through her window, casting soft stripes across the room. She dressed in a simple cream blouse and trousers that she had brought from Brooklyn, her own clothes among the racks of designer gowns that Mrs. Dalton had prepared. She preferred the familiar texture of worn cotton to silk. When she stepped into the hallway, the scent of coffee drifted faintly through the air. Downstairs, the household moved like a well-rehearsed orchestra. The staff cleaned, arranged, and prepared breakfast with quiet precision. When Lena entered the dining room, Ethan was already there, reading the morning paper again. A pot of coffee steamed beside him. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound steady. He looked up, his gaze calm but distant. "Good morning. You slept well, I hope?" "Well enough," she answered. "It still feels like I am walking through someone else's life." "You will get used to it," he said. "Routine helps." He poured her a cup of coffee before continuing to read. The gesture surprised her, not romantic, but unexpectedly kind. She sat opposite him, watching the steam curl between them. "Mrs. Dalton mentioned you have business in the city today," she said. "I do," Ethan replied. "A meeting with the board. They expect to see us together soon, but not yet. It is better to let the press digest the announcement first." Lena nodded slowly. "And what do I do while you are away?" "Whatever helps you feel normal," he said. "The estate is yours to explore. There is also a small art studio in the south wing. My mother used to paint there. You might find it useful." The idea caught her off guard. "She painted?" "Every Sunday," he said quietly. "It was the only day she refused to talk about business." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe I will visit it then." When Ethan left later that morning, the house grew still again. Lena wandered through the corridors until she found the south wing. The air there smelled faintly of turpentine and dust. Light poured through tall windows onto canvases that had been left half-finished years ago. One painting showed a woman sitting beside a child, their faces turned toward the sea. She traced the edge of the canvas gently. There was warmth in the strokes, a softness that seemed almost out of place in this world of rules and contracts. Mrs. Dalton appeared at the doorway. "That was Mrs. Ward's last work," she said quietly. "Mr. Ethan never let anyone move it." "She must have been extraordinary," Lena said. "She was," the housekeeper replied. "And he is more like her than he allows himself to believe." When Mrs. Dalton left, Lena stayed for a long while, studying the painting. She could see, in every brushstroke, a reminder that this mansion had once been more than marble and rules. It had been a home. By afternoon, the clouds had returned, dimming the light in the studio. Lena sat by the window with a sketchbook from one of the drawers, letting her hand move across the page. Drawing had always been her escape, her quiet rebellion against chaos. She lost track of time until the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke her focus. Ethan had returned earlier than expected. She met him in the entry hall. His tie was loosened, his expression unreadable. "Rough day?" she asked. "Predictable," he said. "The board does not like surprises, and marrying you qualifies as one." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Do they think I am a mistake?" He glanced at her, a hint of dry humor in his eyes. "They think I am reckless, which is not entirely false." He started up the stairs, then paused. "You were in the studio." She nodded. "It is beautiful. I understand why your mother loved it." Ethan's face softened slightly. "I am glad you went there. She would have liked you." It was a small sentence, but it lingered in Lena's mind long after he had gone. For the first time since she stepped into that house, she felt something shift, an invisible thread connecting her to the man behind the contract. That night, as the estate lights dimmed, Lena sat by her window again. The painting, the coffee, the quiet conversation, all of it replayed in her mind. The contract had promised no affection, no complication, no risk. Yet already, the lines between agreement and connection had begun to blur. And in the stillness of that grand, lonely house, she wondered if the real danger was not losing herself, but finding something she had stopped believing in. The next few days at the Ward estate unfolded with an uneasy rhythm. The news of Ethan's sudden marriage had begun to reach the outer circles of New York society, and whispers were spreading faster than facts. Inside the mansion, however, life moved with the same quiet precision. The staff spoke in low tones, and every movement seemed to echo through the wide halls. Lena had started to sense it, the subtle shift in how people looked at her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, remained polite, though distant. The other staff members greeted her with practiced courtesy, but their eyes often carried a trace of judgment. It was as if every smile she gave was weighed against the question they dared not ask aloud. Why her? One afternoon, as Lena passed through the main hall, She overheard two maids speaking near the stairwell. Their voices were low, but the marble carried the sound clearly. "She seems kind," one whispered. "But do you really think he married her for love?" "Love?" the other scoffed. "Mr. Ward does not believe in that. She must have something he needs." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they mirrored the truth. She was here because of a contract. The kindness Ethan had shown the coffee, the quiet conversation was not proof of affection. It was professionalism. That evening, she joined Ethan for dinner as usual. The table between them felt longer than ever. He noticed the silence that clung to her. "You are quiet tonight," he said, setting down his glass. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "About what?" Lena hesitated. "About the staff. They look at me differently. I suppose I cannot blame them." Ethan leaned back, studying her expression. "They will adjust. They respect authority, not rumor." "But I am not authority," she said softly. "I am a guest wearing your name." His gaze lingered on her. "You are more than that, Lena. You are my wife by law and by contract. No one in this house should make you feel otherwise." His tone was firm, almost protective, and for a moment she saw a glimpse of the leader everyone feared in the boardroom. Yet beneath the strength, there was sincerity she had not expected. "Thank you," she said. "I just want to earn my place here, even if it is temporary." He looked at her with quiet thoughtfulness. "Earning it is not your responsibility. I brought you here. The burden is mine." The conversation ended there, but it stayed with her long after dinner. The next morning, Lena decided to take action in her own quiet way. She went to the kitchen early, rolling up her sleeves to help the staff arrange breakfast. The workers froze at the sight of her holding a tray. "Mrs. Ward, you do not need to," one of them began, but Lena only smiled. "I know," she said gently. "I want to." By the time Ethan came downstairs, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The maids were no longer whispering. They were smiling, even laughing softly as Lena carried a plate of fresh pastries to the table. He stopped in the doorway, momentarily taken aback. "What are you doing?" "Trying not to feel like a statue," she said. "I hope you do not mind." His lips curved slightly. "I suppose not, though I should warn you, if you continue doing everyone's job, I might have to fire half the staff." She laughed quietly, and for the first time, the sound felt natural in that room. Mrs. Dalton, watching from a distance, said nothing, but later that day, she placed a small vase of fresh lilies on Lena's bedside table. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a wordless gesture of respect. That night, Lena walked through the garden under the soft glow of the lamps. The air smelled faintly of roses and rain. From the terrace above, Ethan stood with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching her for a long moment before returning inside. Neither of them said it aloud, but something between them had begun to change. The contract still existed, but so did something less defined, something that could not be written into any agreement. And as the evening settled over the estate, Lena realized that respect, once earned, could open doors that paper and signatures never could. The morning sun rose pale over the Ward estate, brushing the marble floors with soft light. It had been almost 2 weeks since the quiet wedding, and though the arrangement remained as formal as ever, the distance between Ethan and Lena had started to shrink in invisible ways. That day, the breakfast table was quiet except for the faint sound of a clock ticking on the wall. Ethan read the financial section, while Lena stirred her coffee absently. The mansion no longer felt cold, but it was still too large for words to fill easily. "I have an event this evening," Ethan said finally, lowering his paper. "A dinner hosted by the Ward Foundation. The press will be there, along with several members of the board. It is time for them to meet Mrs. Ward in person." Lena nodded. "A charity event?" "Yes," he replied. "My mother began it years ago. It supports children's hospitals. We have not hosted it since her passing." His tone softened just slightly when he mentioned her. "It is important that you attend." "I will be there," she said. Ethan studied her for a moment. "The staff will arrange something suitable for you to wear. It will be formal, but not excessive." Lena smiled faintly. "Do not worry. I promise not to embarrass you." He looked at her, and for the first time that morning, his expression changed. Something like quiet amusement flickered in his eyes. "That is not what worries me." When evening came, the estate was alive with preparation. Stylists moved through the halls with careful efficiency. In the upstairs dressing room, Lena stood before the mirror once again, this time wearing a floor-length gown of deep emerald green. It shimmered when she moved, the color drawing warmth into her complexion. Mrs. Dalton adjusted the last fold near her shoulder. "Perfect," she said softly. "You look like you belong." The words caught Lena off guard. "Thank you," she whispered. Downstairs, Ethan waited in a tailored black suit. When she appeared at the top of the staircase, he looked up, and for a rare moment, his composure faltered. He quickly hid it behind his usual calm, but the pause did not go unnoticed. "You look prepared," he said, his voice even but lower than usual. She smiled slightly. "You mean acceptable. I mean more than that." The car ride to the event was quiet but not uncomfortable. City lights flashed through the tinted windows as they crossed the bridge into Manhattan. When they arrived at the grand ballroom of the Foundation's headquarters, cameras already lined the entrance. As soon as they stepped out, a wave of flashes erupted. Reporters called Ethan's name, and the hum of voices rose instantly. He placed a steady hand on Lena's back, guiding her forward through the lights. "Smile, but do not stop walking," he murmured softly. "They feed on hesitation." "Oh." Lena nodded, keeping her chin high. The flashes were blinding, but she moved with quiet grace, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To anyone watching, they looked every bit the powerful couple, elegant, composed, and untouchable. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and polished silver. Conversations buzzed around them, each voice carrying the subtle tension of high society, smiles edged with curiosity. Ethan greeted a few members of the board, his tone cordial but distant. "This is my wife, Lena Ward," he said simply each time. Lena offered polite smiles and brief handshakes, but she could feel the eyes on her. They lingered longer than necessary, analyzing her dress, her posture, even her accent. She knew the question behind every look. Who is she, and what does she want? During dinner, she sat beside Ethan at the head table. Across from them, Adrian Ward, his cousin, raised a glass with an easy smile that did not reach his eyes. "So this is the new Mrs. Ward," Adrian said. "We were all curious, cousin. You certainly know how to surprise the board." Ethan's expression did not change. "Surprises are sometimes necessary." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "Indeed, though I must admit, it is refreshing to see you follow in your father's footsteps, mixing business with personal contracts." The words were casual, but sharp. A few people nearby exchanged glances. Lena felt her chest tighten, but before she could speak, Ethan's voice cut through the table, calm, measured, but with an edge of steel. "My father's mistakes are not mine, Adrian. I prefer agreements that benefit everyone involved." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clinking of glasses. Adrian smiled thinly and turned away, but the tension lingered. Later that evening, as the orchestra played softly and guests mingled, Lena stepped out onto the balcony for air. The city stretched below her, glittering like a sea of glass. She heard footsteps behind her. "You handled yourself well," Ethan said, joining her at the railing. "I almost lost it," she admitted. "Your cousin seems to enjoy testing people." "He enjoys seeing what makes them break," Ethan replied. "He will not get that from you." Their eyes met under the golden city light. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. There was no contract, no clause, no pretense, just two people caught in the strange balance between duty and something unspoken. When they returned inside, the music shifted to a slow waltz. Ethan extended his hand. "One dance. For the cameras, of course." Lena hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. As they moved across the floor, the room seemed to fade around them. Their steps were perfectly synchronized, their faces calm for the watching crowd. But under the surface, something deeper pulsed, something neither of them could name yet. When the dance ended, applause rose softly. Ethan bowed slightly, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You did not embarrass me," Lena smiled. "I will take that as a compliment." "It was," he said, and for the first time, she believed him. That night, as the car carried them back to the estate, the city lights faded behind them. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was no longer cold. It was the kind of silence that holds the first spark of something real. The night after the charity gala lingered in Lena's memory like the echo of a melody that refused to fade. The dance, the applause, and the look in Ethan's eyes when the music stopped, all of it replayed in her mind as she lay awake in the dark. For the first time, she realized that the line between their contract and something far more human had started to blur. The following morning, the news was everywhere. Photographs of the couple at the Ward Foundation Gala dominated social media and the business columns. Headlines called them the city's most mysterious newlyweds. Some praised their elegance. Others speculated about the true reason behind their sudden union. At breakfast, Ethan scrolled through the articles on his tablet, his face unreadable. Lena sat across from him, sipping her coffee slowly. "They are already guessing how much your dress cost," he said without looking up. She smiled faintly. "Let them. At least they like the color." Ethan set the tablet aside. "You handled yourself well last night." The board was impressed. "Even Adrian will have a harder time questioning this now." "That is good," she said. "Maybe this arrangement is starting to work." "It is," he replied. Then softer, "Thanks to you." The words hung between them for a moment, simple, yet heavier than she expected. After breakfast, Ethan left for the city. Lena remained at the estate, the quiet returning like a familiar shadow. But something was different now. The staff no longer avoided her. Mrs. Dalton had begun greeting her with warmth, and even the gardeners waved when she crossed the courtyard. In the afternoon, Mrs. Dalton approached her with a folded invitation card. "This arrived for you, Mrs. Ward. It is addressed to both of you, but I was asked to give it to you personally." Lena opened it. Inside was an embossed letterhead from the Metropolitan Museum. Ward Enterprises Charity Art Auction, hosted by Adrian Ward. Her stomach tightened. She could almost hear the man's smug voice. It was an invitation, but it felt like a challenge. When Ethan returned later that evening, she handed him the card. "Adrian wants us at the auction." He read it, then gave a quiet laugh that carried no real amusement. "Of course he does. He wants to prove something." "What will you do?" she asked. "We will go," Ethan said. "But this time, we will do more than show up. We will take control of the story he keeps trying to write for us." The next few days passed quickly. Reporters continued to publish flattering but speculative stories about the couple. The gossip was relentless, but it also began to shift public perception. Ethan was no longer the cold CEO the press once painted him as. With Lena beside him, his image had softened, almost human. On the evening of the auction, the city lights burned bright against the winter sky. The museum was filled with the hum of conversation and the faint clinking of glasses. Ethan and Lena entered hand in hand, their poise unshakable. Cameras flashed again, but this time Lena was ready for it. Inside, the exhibits glowed under soft golden light. Paintings lined the walls, some from famous artists, others donated by private collectors. The air carried the faint scent of champagne and old money. Adrian appeared moments later, his smile polished and practiced. "Ethan," he greeted, then turned to Lena. "And the lovely Mrs. Ward. You certainly know how to make an entrance." Lena returned his smile with one of her own, calm and unbothered. "You invited us." "Adrian?" It would have been rude not to come. The faintest flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but he quickly masked it. "Enjoy the evening. I hope you find something worth bidding on." As he walked away, Ethan leaned closer. "You handled that perfectly." "I have had a good teacher," she said quietly. The auction began an hour later. Pieces sold for astonishing sums, each winning bid, followed by polite applause. When a painting appeared on stage, a portrait of Margaret Ward, Ethan's mother, the room fell into respectful silence. The auctioneer spoke reverently about her contributions to the foundation. Ethan's expression shifted. It was the first time Lena had seen him visibly affected by something in public. Adrian's voice cut through the room. "This piece," he announced loudly, "is a tribute to our family's history. I think it belongs to someone who truly values that legacy." His words were a challenge, and everyone knew it. Ethan raised his paddle. $200,000. Adrian smiled. 250. Lena's heart pounded. She looked at Ethan, his jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the painting. 300, Ethan said evenly. Adrian leaned back, feigning amusement. "Generous of you, cousin. But tell me, How much is sentiment worth when your company's stock has dropped this quarter? The crowd murmured. It was a calculated blow. Before Ethan could respond, Lena spoke clearly, her voice steady and warm. $500,000. Every head turned. Even Ethan looked at her in surprise. Adrian blinked. Excuse me? Lena smiled. You said the painting belongs to someone who values legacy. I do. And I believe preserving the memory of a woman who built hope for others is worth every cent. The room erupted in applause. The auctioneer confirmed the sale, and the portrait was carried off the stage. Adrian said nothing more. When the night ended, Ethan escorted Lena to the car, the city's lights reflecting in his eyes. You did not have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did, she replied. Because sometimes legacy needs a voice. He looked at her, the faintest trace of emotion breaking through his guarded expression. You reminded me what it really means to be a Ward. As the car drove away, the portrait of Margaret Ward hung once more under the family name. For the first time, Ethan did not feel like he was fighting alone, and Lena realized that her presence in his life had already changed more than either of them had planned. The days following the auction brought a quiet shift to the Ward estate. The painting of Margaret Ward was returned to its rightful place above the grand staircase, where the morning light touched the soft colors of its frame. It was more than just a painting now. It was a declaration, one that neither Ethan nor Lena needed to speak aloud. The story of Lena's unexpected bid spread quickly. News outlets called it the moment that silenced the Ward rivals. Social media called her the woman who outplayed Wall Street. But inside the mansion, things were much quieter. Ethan had become more reserved, though not distant. He seemed to carry a new kind of awareness of Lena, of what she had done, and of what it meant. One morning, as Lena passed by his office, she saw him standing by the window, looking at the city skyline beyond the estate. Papers and files covered his desk, but he was not reading them. He was lost in thought. She knocked softly on the doorframe. You have been standing there for a long time, she said. Ethan turned, a faint smile touching his face. Thinking seems to be my only hobby lately. Dangerous hobby, she teased. It leads to conclusions. He chuckled quietly, the sound rare but genuine. True, but some conclusions are overdue. Lena stepped inside. The office, usually filled with the cold precision of corporate order, felt different today. The painting of his mother that once hung in his city office now leaned against a wall, waiting to be rehung. I wanted to thank you again, Ethan said. Not just for the auction, for reminding me what this foundation was built for. You do not need to thank me, she replied. Your mother built something real. You just had to remember that it still matters. He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. You talk as if you knew her. Lena smiled gently. I think I do. Through the way people here still talk about her, through her art, through you. The words caught him off guard. Through me? Yes, she said. You carry her discipline, her belief and purpose. You hide it behind rules and numbers, but it is there. Ethan looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. It is easier to hide than to lose. She tilted her head. You sound like someone who has lost more than you will admit. He exhaled, turning his gaze back toward the window. When she died, I buried everything that came with her. Compassion, warmth, trust. They all felt like weaknesses in a world that measures worth by profit margins. I thought if I stayed cold, I would stay in control. And has it worked? Lena asked softly. He met her eyes, and for the first time, there was no distance in his voice. Until you showed up, the silence that followed felt heavier than any conversation they had ever shared. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass, scattering a few leaves across the terrace. Lena's heartbeat quickened, but she did not look away. Before she could speak, Mrs. Dalton appeared at the door. Mr. Ward, she said carefully, the board members are arriving for the afternoon meeting. Ethan nodded, the quiet between him and Lena breaking like glass. Thank you, Mrs. Dalton. I will be there shortly. When the housekeeper left, Lena moved toward the door. You should go. They will be waiting. Lena, Ethan said softly, stopping her. Tonight, there is a private dinner at the foundation offices. Only a few members of the press will attend. It is not mandatory for you, but I would prefer you come. She turned slightly, her voice calm but steady. Do you prefer it, or do you want it? For a moment, he said nothing. Then, Quietly, "I want it." That evening, the city shimmered under a thin mist. The dinner was small, held in the top floor of the foundation's glass tower. The mood was light, almost celebratory. Several guests approached Lena, complimenting her grace at the auction. She smiled, answered politely, and played her part perfectly. Halfway through the evening, Ethan found her standing by the window, looking down at the streets glowing with headlights. "You do not enjoy parties much," he said. "They feel like performances," she replied. "Everyone pretending to be what they are not." "Then perhaps we are both guilty," he said quietly. She looked at him, her expression soft. "You are not pretending tonight," he smiled faintly. "Neither are you." They stood in silence for a moment. The city spread out beneath them like a living map. Then Ethan spoke again, his tone quieter than before. "Lena, do you ever regret it, signing that contract?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said no. But regret?" She shook her head. "No, because everything that brought me here taught me something." "And what has it taught you?" "That even a life built on rules can still make room for kindness," she said. "That sometimes pretending becomes real in the smallest, most unexpected ways." Ethan's gaze lingered on her face, the lights of the city reflecting in his eyes. "Then maybe it was never pretending," he said softly. Lena opened her mouth to answer, but the sound of a phone vibrating on the table broke the moment. Ethan picked it up. His expression changed, instantly controlled, but sharp. "It is Adrian," he said. "He is moving against the foundation. He called an emergency session for tomorrow morning." Lena felt a chill run through her. "He is not finished, is he?" "No," Ethan said, his voice hardening. "But this time, neither am I." The warmth of the moment faded, replaced by the shadow of conflict. Yet beneath that tension, something new had taken root between them, a fragile understanding that even in the chaos ahead, they were no longer just bound by a contract. They were bound by choice. The next morning arrived with a quiet tension that hung over the Ward estate like a storm waiting to break. Ethan had already left before dawn, his car disappearing down the long driveway toward the foundation headquarters. Lena stood at the window, watching the taillights fade until they were swallowed by the mist. She did not know what Adrian was planning, but she could sense it was not just a business maneuver. It was personal. In the hours that followed, the house felt hollow. Even Mrs. Dalton, who usually moved with calm precision, seemed unsettled. When Lena passed the dining room, she found the morning paper folded neatly on the table. Across the front page, bold letters read, "Ward Foundation faces internal dispute." The accompanying photo showed Adrian Ward smiling for the cameras outside the building. Lena read the first few lines quickly. Adrian had called for an emergency meeting, claiming concerns over mismanagement and unauthorized financial decisions under Ethan's leadership. Her pulse quickened. She knew exactly what that meant. He was trying to use the contract marriage to discredit Ethan's authority. She grabbed her phone and dialed Ethan's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She left a short message. "Be careful. He is using your personal life. Do not let him twist it." Oh. Hours later, the news channels began broadcasting updates. A small group of reporters gathered outside Ward Enterprises' main tower. Rumors spread that the board had split into factions. Some supported Ethan. Others saw Adrian as the more stable successor. By noon, Lena could not stay still any longer. She called for the driver. "Take me to the foundation," she said. When the car arrived downtown, the sidewalks were crowded with journalists and photographers. Lena stepped out, the cameras flashing instantly. Questions flew through the air. "Mrs. Ward, is your marriage real? Did you influence the board's finances? Is this another Ward scandal?" She did not answer. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered the lobby, her chin held high. The receptionist looked startled to see her, but did not dare stop her. Upstairs, the boardroom door was closed. Voices carried through the heavy wood Adrian's confident tone, followed by the murmurs of older board members. When Lena opened the door, the room fell silent. Adrian turned first, a faint smirk on his face. "Ah, Mrs. Ward. How fitting that you join us. We were just discussing your husband's recent decisions." Ethan sat at the far end of the long table, composed but tense. He stood immediately. You should not be here, Lena. I had to be, she said firmly. He is using me against you. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Using you? Oh no, my dear. I am merely pointing out that our CEO entered a legally binding marriage with a woman whose background has not been verified. That is not scandalous, of course, but it raises questions about judgment. Lena's eyes flashed. You mean it threatens your plan to steal what his mother built? The room murmured, several members shifting uncomfortably. Adrian's smile tightened. Watch your tone. You are speaking to the board. No, Ethan said suddenly, his voice calm but edged with steel. She is speaking to the truth. He walked around the table, stopping beside Lena. My marriage is not a weakness. The Ward Foundation was built on integrity and compassion, values that Lena reminds me to uphold. If any of you believe I would compromise that legacy, then you never understood this family at all. Adrian laughed softly. Pretty words. But sentiment will not protect you when the media uncovers that this marriage was signed as a contract. The silence that followed was sharp. Ethan did not flinch. You want to expose it? Go ahead. But while you are at it, explain how you diverted $2 million from the Foundation's scholarship fund into your own investment branch last quarter. Gasps filled the room. Adrian's face drained of color. Ethan placed a folder on the table. This is an internal audit report. I have enough evidence to take it public. So perhaps we should stop pretending who the real threat to this foundation is. Adrian's composure cracked for the first time. You cannot prove. I already have, Ethan interrupted, and the press will have the rest by tomorrow morning. The board members exchanged glances, their decision clear, without a word spoken. Adrian's seat of power had just crumbled. Lena felt her breath steady for the first time since she walked in. Ethan turned toward her, his voice quiet now. You did not have to come, but you did anyway. I could not stand by while he used your mother's name to destroy you, she said. For a moment, the room disappeared around them. There was only the faint hum of the city outside and the weight of what they had just survived together. When the meeting adjourned, the reporters outside swarmed again. Ethan shielded Lena with his arm as they exited. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions. But this time, neither of them flinched. In the car, as they drove away from the noise, Lena finally exhaled. You knew about Adrian's scheme all along, did you not? I suspected, Ethan said. But I needed proof. You gave me the reason to fight for it. She looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. Then I am glad I did not stay silent. Ethan's voice softened. So am I. Oh, for the first time since the contract began, the space between them felt safe not because of signatures or obligations, but because they had chosen to stand together when it mattered most. As the car crossed the bridge back toward the estate, the skyline shimmered behind them. Somewhere in the distance, the first light of dawn began to rise, painting the city gold. And for Ethan and Lena, that light felt like the beginning of something neither of them had expected when they first signed their names on paper. It felt like trust. The next week unfolded with a strange calm. For the first time since the contract had been signed, Ethan and Lena moved through the days without the constant weight of secrecy and tension pressing between them. The news of Adrian's failed coup had reached the public, but Ethan managed the situation with grace. The Ward Foundation's statement was firm and clear. Integrity had been tested and proven stronger than ambition. The press, hungry for scandal, instead found redemption. Ethan Ward, the man once known for his cold demeanor, was now painted as the protector of his late mother's legacy. And beside him, Lena Ward became the quiet, elegant figure who had stood by him through it all. The mansion was busier than usual that week. Calls came in, interviews were scheduled, and flowers arrived from allies who wanted to align themselves with the restored Ward family image. But inside those walls, the real shift was quieter. Lena had started spending her mornings in the South Wing art studio again. The air there smelled of sunlight and turpentine. The painting of Margaret Ward still stood near the window, watching over her like a silent mentor. Each day, Lena worked on a new piece, a portrait that was slowly taking shape on a blank canvas. One afternoon, Ethan found her there. He leaned against the doorway, watching as she moved the brush in soft, deliberate strokes. You never told me you could paint, he said. Lena turned, smiling lightly. It is more therapy than talent. It keeps me from overthinking. He stepped closer, his voice softer. "It looks like peace." "Maybe it is," she replied. "Something this house has not had in a long time." Ethan studied the painting. It was not finished, but he recognized the familiar outline, the curves of the mansion, the reflection of the garden pond, and two small figures walking along the path. He realized, after a moment, that they looked like the two of them. "You painted us," he said quietly. "Not us exactly," she said. "Just two people trying to find where they belong." For a moment, he said nothing. The sunlight caught his face, softening the sharp lines that the world usually saw. "You make it sound simple," he said. "Maybe it is supposed to be," she replied. He gave a faint smile, then turned his gaze toward the window. "The board wants me to return to the public circuit, press events, shareholder meetings, dinners. They think it is time to prove that Ward Enterprises is stronger than ever. And what do you think?" "I think they are right," he said. "But it feels different now. It does not feel like fighting anymore." "Because you are not alone this time," she said quietly. He looked at her again, and in that moment, there was something unspoken in his eyes, something that went beyond gratitude or admiration. Later that evening, a small gathering was held at the Foundation's headquarters to celebrate the renewed funding of the Children's Hospital program. Lena accompanied Ethan, just as she always did, but this time there was no tension, no rehearsed facade. When he introduced her to the board, he said the words not like a script, but like truth. "This is Lena Ward," he said. "The reason this foundation remembers what it stands for." There was polite applause, but Lena barely heard it. Her focus was on Ethan, the quiet pride in his tone, the sincerity that could not be faked. After the speeches, they stepped outside for air. The night was crisp, and the city lights shimmered against the river. Ethan loosened his tie slightly, a rare act of ease. "You were right," he said softly. "About hope, about kindness. I used to think those things made people weak. Now I think they are the only things that keep us human." Lena looked at him, her voice low. "Maybe we both had something to learn." He nodded. "Maybe we still do." They stood by the railing in silence for a long time, the wind cool against their faces. Around them, the world moved on cars below, lights flickering, time pressing forward. But between them, the moment held steady. When they returned to the mansion later that night, Mrs. Dalton met them at the door with a relieved smile. "It is good to see laughter return to this house," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at Lena. "It is her doing," he said. The housekeeper nodded knowingly. "Then let us hope she stays." Lena felt her heart tighten at the words. She wanted to believe that staying was still her choice, that when the 6 months were over, she could simply walk away as the contract had promised. But deep down, she knew that the promise had already begun to unravel. That night, in her room, Lena looked at the painting again. The two figures walking in the garden had grown clearer. The space between them had shrunk. In his study across the hall, Ethan sat at his desk, the contract folder open before him. The signatures stared back at him like ghosts, from a deal that no longer made sense. He ran a hand over the paper, then closed it quietly. The house fell silent, but not cold. The kind of silence that comes when two people stand on the edge of something real, something neither of them had expected, yet both had started to want. And in that stillness, both Ethan and Lena knew that their story had already crossed the point of no return. The first cold wind of November swept through the Ward estate, stirring the branches of the tall oak trees outside the windows. The season was changing, and with it, the fragile balance between Ethan and Lena began to shift again. The public believed their marriage was a love story, two people overcoming scandal to protect a legacy. But behind the mansion's stone walls, another kind of tension had started to build, quiet but unmistakable. Lena noticed it first in small ways. Ethan began leaving for the city earlier than usual, sometimes returning long after midnight. His schedule had always been demanding, but now his absences felt deliberate. The phone calls he took were shorter, sharper, and when they did share meals together, his attention seemed elsewhere. One morning, she entered the dining room to find Mrs. Dalton setting the table for one. "Mr. Ward left at dawn," the housekeeper explained gently. "He said he might be away for several days." Lena tried to hide her disappointment. "Did he say where?" "No, ma'am. Only that it concerned the foundation." Lena nodded, thanking her, then sat in silence. The coffee on the table had gone cold. She told herself it was just business. Another crisis, another decision that could not wait. But something in her chest felt unsettled. Over the next few days, the house grew emptier. The staff spoke less. The halls echoed with quiet steps. Lena returned to the art studio to distract herself. The unfinished painting still stood by the window, the two figures almost complete. But every time she lifted her brush, she found her hand hesitating. Late one evening, she decided to call Ethan. His assistant answered instead. "Mr. Ward is in meetings, Mrs. Ward," the woman said politely. "Would you like to leave a message?" Lena forced a smile through the phone. "No, that is not necessary. Just tell him I hope everything is all right." When the call ended, she stood by the window for a long time, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time since she entered the contract, she felt the weight of it again, not as an obligation, but as a boundary that suddenly felt too real. 2 nights later, Ethan returned. She heard the sound of the car pulling into the driveway long after midnight. The front door opened quietly, and footsteps echoed through the corridor. Lena stepped out into the hallway, her robe drawn close around her. "You are home," she said softly. He stopped at the bottom of the staircase, clearly surprised to see her awake. "You should be sleeping." "I could not," she replied. "You have been gone for days." "I was worried." Ethan looked exhausted. There were faint shadows under his eyes, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. He sighed, leaning against the railing. There were meetings with investors and press statements. Adrian's scandal is still rippling through the markets. "I read about it," Lena said, "but you did not have to carry all of it alone." He hesitated, his expression unreadable. "It is easier that way." "Easier?" she repeated quietly, "but not better." The silence between them deepened. For a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. "Ethan," she said finally, "you are shutting me out again." He looked up, his voice low but firm. "I am trying to protect you." "From what?" "From this world," he said. "From the weight of it. Every time I let someone close, they get crushed by what comes with my name." Her eyes softened. "I am not afraid of your name. I am afraid of watching you lose yourself behind it." Ethan's jaw tightened. He turned toward the window, his reflection faint against the glass. "You think I do not see what this life does to people? Everyone who gets near me ends up with scars." "Then let me choose that risk," she said quietly. "Do not make that choice for me." "Oh." He turned back to her then, his eyes meeting hers. The distance between them felt like 1,000 miles, but neither moved away. "Lena," he said softly, "you make this harder than it should be." "Maybe it was never meant to be easy," she replied. The clock struck midnight. The sound echoed through the hall, marking the passing of another day neither of them could take back. Ethan finally spoke, his tone softer. "Tomorrow, there is a press dinner at the Grand Hotel. I want you there." "Oak." She nodded slowly. "All right. Thank you," he said, almost whispering. When he turned to leave, Lena called after him. "Ethan?" He paused at the doorway. "You do not have to protect me from your life," she said. "You just have to let me be part of it." He did not answer. Instead, he gave a slow nod before disappearing down the hall. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Lena returned to her room. She looked at the painting once more. The two figures on the canvas stood side by side now, but their faces were unfinished, like two people still deciding who they were to each other. Downstairs, Ethan stood alone in his study, staring at the contract folder again. The pages had begun to fray at the edges, the ink slightly faded. He thought of her words. "You just have to let me be part of it." He closed the folder gently, his reflection mirrored in the glass of the desk. For the first time in a long time, he wondered what would happen if he stopped fighting everything he could not control and simply allowed himself to feel. The mansion went dark soon after, but the silence no longer felt cold. It was the quiet before another turning point, one neither of them saw coming. Yet both had already begun to sense. The following evening arrived with the muted glow of city lights filtering through the windows of the Grand Hotel ballroom. The event Ethan mentioned, a formal press dinner hosted by Ward Enterprises, was meant to reaffirm the company's stability after months of public tension. The guests included investors, journalists, and several board members. It was a night designed for control, image, and reassurance. But for Ethan and Lena, it would become something far more revealing. Lena arrived beside him, her emerald dress from the Foundation Gala replaced by a sleek navy gown. Her presence drew quiet admiration from the room the moment they entered. Ethan walked beside her, his expression composed, his every movement precise. Together, they looked like a couple untouched by rumor, bound not by contract but by purpose. As they moved through the crowd, people greeted them with practiced smiles. "Mr. and Mrs. Ward," one of the journalists said, shaking Ethan's hand. "Your appearance tonight speaks volumes. The city needed to see this." Ethan offered a polite nod. Sometimes actions speak louder than statements. Lena noticed the way his hand rested briefly on her back, subtle, steady, grounding. It was a gesture that had never appeared in the contract. It felt natural, almost protective. They took their seats near the center of the long dining table, beneath a chandelier that shimmered like crystal rain. The evening began with speeches from the board and a short video tribute to the Foundation's new programs. The atmosphere was warm, professional, rehearsed. But beneath the polite laughter and applause, Lena could sense something shifting in Ethan. His tone softened when he introduced her to colleagues, and when she spoke, he listened not as a man managing appearances, but as someone genuinely present. During the dinner, a journalist approached with a small recorder. "Mr. Ward," she said politely, "your family's name has seen many headlines this year. Some wonder if the stability of your company is due in part to your marriage. Would you say Mrs. Ward has influenced your leadership?" Ethan glanced at Lena, then back at the journalist. "Yes," he said simply, "she has." There was a ripple of surprise around the table. The journalist leaned forward slightly. "In what way?" Ethan spoke calmly, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "Before I met her, leadership was about numbers, profit, and power. But I realized those things mean little without integrity, empathy, and purpose. She reminded me that success without humanity is failure in disguise." The journalist blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his tone. The recorder clicked softly as she turned it off. "That is quite a statement, Mr. Ward." "It is the truth," he said. When the journalist moved away, Lena turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. "You did not have to say that." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Oh, for the rest of the evening, Ethan and Lena moved like a team. They spoke with investors, answered questions, and stood side by side for photographs. The energy between them was calm yet magnetic, real, in a way no one could fabricate. Later, after the last toast was made and the music softened, Ethan suggested they step outside for air. The terrace overlooked the city, its skyline glimmering under the night sky. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. "You handled that beautifully," Ethan said, leaning on the railing. Lena smiled faintly. "I was just trying to keep up with you." He shook his head. "No, Lena. You do not follow, you lead. And lately, I think I have been following your example more than I realized." The wind brushed against her hair, and she tucked a strand behind her ear. "You sound like someone about to make a confession." Ethan's gaze lingered on her. "Maybe I am." She turned to face him fully. "Then say it." He hesitated, his voice lower now. "When this began, I thought of it as a transaction, a way to save what mattered, my company, my mother's legacy. I did not expect it to change me." Lena's heartbeat quickened. "And has it?" "Yes," he said. "You changed it. You changed me." The words hung in the night air, soft but unmistakable. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sound of the city faded into silence. Lena looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, you know what happens when we start believing this is more than it was supposed to be." "I know," he said, "but pretending it is not real would be a bigger lie." Her eyes glistened under the soft terrace lights. "Then what do we do?" He exhaled slowly. "We stop hiding behind the contract. We face whatever comes next together." For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "That sounds dangerously close to hope." Ethan smiled faintly. "It is." Oh, they stood there, side by side, the city stretching endlessly before them. For the first time since the day they signed their names on that agreement, the silence between them was not filled with tension, it was filled with understanding. When they returned inside, the room had begun to empty. The photographers had packed their cameras, the waiters were clearing the tables, and the chandeliers dimmed to a softer glow. Ethan offered her his arm again. "Let us go home," he said. And for the first time, the word home did not sound like a mansion, or an image, or an arrangement. It sounded like something they had both started to build slowly, imperfectly, and entirely together. As they left the ballroom, a reporter called after them, "Mr. Ward, one last question. Are the rumors true that your marriage began as a business deal?" Ethan paused, looked back, and said with quiet conviction, "It began as a deal, but it became something real." Then he guided Lena through the doors, leaving behind the flashing cameras and the noise, stepping into the cool night that now felt, for both of them, like a promise. The drive back from the Grand Hotel was quiet, but not cold. The city lights trailed past the car windows in streaks of gold and silver, soft reflections flickering across Lena's face. Ethan sat beside her, his jacket undone, his usual sharp composure replaced with something gentler, an exhaustion that felt almost peaceful. For once, neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. When they reached the estate, Mrs. Dalton was waiting at the door, her expression calm but curious. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Ward. I saw the news. The photographs from the event are already circulating. The city cannot stop talking about you two." Ethan gave a faint smile. "As long as they are talking about the work, not the rumors, I will consider it a success." Mrs. Dalton's eyes shifted to Lena. "They are saying your speech stole the night, ma'am. You reminded people what the foundation stands for." Lena smiled warmly. That was the goal. When the housekeeper left them, the mansion fell quiet again. The night air carried a faint chill through the open windows. Lena walked toward the grand staircase, her hand brushing against the wooden railing polished smooth with time. Ethan followed a few steps behind. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. She turned, surprised. "For what?" "For being there. For standing beside me when everything else felt like a performance." Lena tilted her head slightly. "I told you once that I did not want to be an ornament in your world. You never treated me like one. Maybe that is why it worked." Ethan's eyes lingered on her. "You make it sound as if it is over." She hesitated. "Isn't it? The contract ends in 3 weeks." The words hung in the air like a quiet truth neither had wanted to confront. Ethan's expression didn't change, but the light in his eyes dimmed slightly. "I have been meaning to talk to you about that," he said. Lena crossed her arms lightly, her tone steady. "Then talk." He took a deep breath. "When we signed the agreement, we both knew what it was: practical, transactional. But things have changed. You have changed them." Her heart beat faster, though she kept her voice calm. "Ethan," he continued, his voice low but certain, "I am not asking you to stay because of duty or appearances. I am asking because I do not want this to end. Not like this." Lena's gaze softened, though uncertainty lingered. "You are asking me to turn a contract into something real. But what if I say yes? And one day, you wake up and realize you only needed me because I was convenient." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Convenience never challenged me. You did. You stood your ground when everyone else walked away. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something without calculating the cost." She looked down for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what if I am afraid of losing myself in your world?" He stepped closer. "Then we build a new one together." The sincerity in his tone left her silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant ticking of the clock in the hallway. Finally, she said softly, "I need time to think." Ethan nodded once. "Take it. But know this, I am not walking away from us, Lena. Not now. Not when it finally feels real." She turned toward the staircase again, her fingers tightening on the railing. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night," he said quietly, watching her disappear up the stairs. When she entered her room, she stood by the window, staring out into the dark garden. The air was cold, but her thoughts burned like wildfire. Everything she had feared, the possibility of feeling too much, of being seen, of belonging, was now standing before her in the shape of a man she had once agreed to marry for business. Downstairs, Ethan remained in the hallway long after she had gone. He loosened his tie and looked around the mansion that had once felt like a fortress. Now, every room echoed with her presence, the faint scent of paint from the studio, the soft sound of her footsteps in the morning, the laughter she had brought into halls that had forgotten what warmth felt like. He walked into his study and opened the desk drawer. Inside was the contract folder, the same one they had signed months ago. The edges were frayed, the ink beginning to fade. He turned to the last page, the signatures, the dates, the clauses. Every word looked hollow now. Ethan picked up a pen, paused, then drew a single line across the entire document, striking through the contract. The sound of the pen sliding across paper was quiet but final. The next morning, Lena found the folder on the dining table. A single note was placed on top in Ethan's handwriting. The contract is over, but what I feel is not. If you decide to stay, it will not be for obligation. It will be because you want to. She held the note for a long moment, her hands trembling slightly. Then she looked toward the window where the sunlight spilled into the room. For the first time, the choice was entirely hers, not written, not signed, not bound by anyone else's rules. And as she stood there, the sound of the ocean wind brushing through the garden trees, Lena realized something she had not before. Freedom was not about walking away. Sometimes, it was about deciding what was worth staying for. The morning sunlight crept slowly through the tall windows of the Ward estate, touching the edges of the dining table where the contract folder still lay open. Lena stood there for a long time, staring at Ethan's note resting on top. The ink was dark and steady, his handwriting clean, deliberate, just like him. The contract is over, but what I feel is not. If you decide to stay, it will not be for obligation. It will be because you want to. She traced the words lightly with her fingertip. Her heart caught between disbelief and a quiet ache that felt too real to ignore. For months, she had lived inside a story built on terms and signatures. Now, for the first time, there were no rules left. Mrs. Dalton entered the room, carrying a tray of breakfast. When she saw the papers, her expression softened. "He told me not to disturb you this morning," she said gently. "He left early, said he needed to give you space." Lena nodded slowly. "Do you know where he went?" "I think to his mother's foundation," the housekeeper replied. "He has not been there alone since her passing." The words settled heavily in the air. After Mrs. Dalton left, Lena sat down and poured herself a cup of coffee. The warmth grounded her. She looked out the window toward the garden, the same garden she had painted only days before. Everything felt familiar yet changed, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her decision. By late afternoon, she found herself standing in the South Wing studio again. The unfinished painting stood before her, sunlight streaking across the canvas. The two figures walking in the garden were nearly complete, but their faces were still blank, waiting for her to decide who they were. She picked up her brush and began to paint. Slow, careful strokes. The woman first, her eyes calm but steady, her posture no longer tentative. Then the man beside her, his expression softened, his stance less rigid. The colors around them were warm now, golden. The distance between them had vanished. When she stepped back, she realized what she had painted. It was not just two people walking through a garden. It was a choice made visible. That evening, Lena drove to the Ward Foundation building downtown. The sun had already begun to set, turning the city skyline into shades of amber and rose. She found Ethan standing in the rooftop garden that his mother had once designed, surrounded by quiet rows of lilies and trimmed hedges. He did not turn immediately when she approached. "I was wondering if you would come," he said. "I needed time," she replied. "And answers." He nodded, still looking out over the city. "You have them now?" "I think so," she said softly, "but I do not know if they are the ones you want to hear." He turned to face her then, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "The only thing I want is honesty. No more pretending, no more rules." Lena stepped closer, the soft sound of her heels echoing against the stone path. "When I came here, I told myself I would not get attached. I had seen too much of what power does to people. But you were not what I expected. You hid behind walls. But you never lied. You tried to protect everyone but yourself." He studied her face carefully. "And now?" "Now," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I see the man your mother raised. The man who still believes in doing the right thing, even when it costs him everything. And I see someone I do not want to lose." For a moment, the world seemed to hold still, the hum of the city below, the whisper of wind through the garden leaves, the faint scent of lilies in bloom. Ethan took a slow breath. "Then stay." "Oh, Lena met his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. "Not because of a contract, Not because of what people think, but because I choose to. His expression broke then not into a smile, but into something deeper, something that looked like relief. You do not know what that means to me. I think I do, she said. They stood there as the last light faded from the horizon, the city glowing beneath them. For the first time, the space between them felt complete, not as an arrangement, but as something built slowly, honestly, and entirely by choice. Later that night, they returned to the estate together. The mansion was quiet, the hallways dim, except for the soft glow of the chandelier above the stairs. As they passed the dining table, Lena paused. The torn contract still lay there, the ink slashed through the pages. She smiled faintly, picked up the folder, and tucked it away in a drawer. No more papers, she said. Ethan nodded. No more contracts. When they reached the study, Lena stopped in front of the painting she had finished earlier that day. Ethan's eyes widened slightly when he saw it, the two figures walking side by side, their faces calm, their shadows intertwined. You painted this? He asked quietly. She nodded. It is us. Not who we were. Who we are now. He looked at the painting for a long time, then turned to her. Then I suppose that means this house finally has a future again. Lena smiled. It always did. It just needed to remember how to breathe. Outside, the night deepened, the garden lights flickering softly in the wind. Inside, the mansion no longer felt like a monument to legacy or loss. It felt alive, like the beginning of something they had both waited far too long to find. And for the first time, neither Ethan nor Lena thought about what came next. They did not need to. For once, the present was enough. The next morning, the Ward estate felt different. The air was lighter, the silence softer. For the first time since she had stepped into that mansion, Lena woke without the weight of uncertainty pressing against her chest. The sun streamed through the curtains, touching the pale gold fabric with warmth. It was a quiet kind of peace. Fragile, but real. She found Ethan in the garden, standing by the old oak tree with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up when she approached, and a faint smile touched his lips. You are up early, he said. I could not sleep, she replied. Too many thoughts. Good ones, I hope. Mostly, she said with a soft laugh. They stood side by side, the morning breeze carrying the scent of damp grass. For a moment, there was no need for words. Everything that had once been said through formality and hesitation now passed silently between them. Ethan broke the quiet first. The board is meeting again next week. They want to discuss expanding the foundation's programs into new cities. This time, I want you there. Me? She asked, surprised. Yes, he said. You are the reason the foundation still has a soul. You reminded me what my mother built it for. It is only right that you have a voice in how it grows. Lena hesitated, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Ethan, I am not a business strategist. I would not know what to say in a boardroom. No, Teen, you will not need to speak their language, he said. You just need to speak the truth. That is something you do better than anyone I know. The sincerity in his tone left her speechless. For a long moment, she could only nod. Then I will be there. Ethan smiled slightly. Good. That is all I wanted to hear. Later that afternoon, Lena returned to the art studio. The painting of the two figures in the garden had dried overnight. She ran her fingertips lightly along the edges of the frame, smiling at the thought that it might one day hang in the foundation's hall, a quiet reminder that redemption and love could be found even in the unlikeliest beginnings. Mrs. Dalton entered quietly behind her. It is a beautiful piece, she said. Mr. Ward asked if he could move it to the main hall. Lena turned, startled. He said that? Yes, the housekeeper replied. He said it should be the first thing people see when they enter. Said it represents what this house finally stands for again. Lena felt her throat tighten with emotion. Then it belongs there. That evening, the household gathered for a small dinner, something simple, intimate, and warm. For once, there were no formal speeches or stiff table settings. Just laughter, quiet conversation, and the sound of rain outside tapping gently against the windows. Ethan lifted his glass halfway through the meal. To new beginnings, he said softly. Lena raised hers too. And to keeping what truly matters. Their eyes met across the table. No grand declarations were needed. Everything was understood. After dinner, Ethan asked her to walk with him. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clean. The garden glistened under the soft glow of the lanterns. They walked slowly along the stone path, the wet leaves crunching softly beneath their shoes. "I used to hate this garden," Ethan said quietly. "It always reminded me of what I lost. But now, when I look at it, I see something different." "What do you see?" Lena asked. "Possibility," he said. "A chance to start again. To build something that is not about control or legacy, but about meaning." She smiled. "That sounds like the man your mother would have been proud of." He stopped walking then, turning to face her. "I hope she would be proud of this too," he said. "Of us." "Oh." Lena met his gaze. "I think she would." The wind shifted, rustling the leaves above them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers. It was not a grand gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement, the kind that said everything words could not. They stood there beneath the old oak tree, the same one that had witnessed so many years of loneliness and silence. Now, it bore witness to something else, a quiet connection born not of obligation, but of choice. When they finally returned inside, Lena paused at the bottom of the staircase. "Ethan," she said softly. He turned back, his expression calm but warm. "Yes? Earlier you said the foundation is expanding. If we are rebuilding everything, maybe we should start with something your mother would have wanted: a scholarship program, maybe an art initiative for underfunded schools. Something for people who never get a chance to start over." Ethan smiled slowly. "That is a brilliant idea." "She believed in giving people dignity," Lena continued. "That is what this foundation should keep doing." "I will make it happen," Ethan said, "but only if you lead it." Lena's eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "You understand it better than anyone." The words left her quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, I will." Ethan smiled again, a small but certain one. "Then it is decided." As he walked down the hall, Lena turned back toward the window. The reflection staring back at her no longer looked like the woman who had once signed a contract for survival. It looked like someone who had built something lasting from it: truth, respect, and maybe even love. And though the rain began again outside, the house no longer felt cold. It breathed, alive with second chances and quiet hope. A week later, the Ward Foundation launched its new community program, an initiative built on Lena's idea. The event was small but meaningful, held in one of the city's restored schools. The walls were freshly painted, the air filled with the hum of children's laughter and the smell of wet chalk. For Ethan, it was not just another press appearance. It was the first time in years that he felt his mother's legacy truly alive again. Lena stood beside him, greeting guests, answering questions, and helping children arrange their first art display. Her hands were smudged with bits of pastel color, her smile genuine. Ethan watched her from across the room, and for a moment, all the noise faded. He saw not the woman who had entered his life through a contract, but the one who had quietly rewritten what love, loyalty, and partnership meant. When the speeches began, Ethan stepped to the podium. The crowd hushed. His voice carried steady and warm. This foundation was built by someone who believed that compassion can change more lives than power ever could. Today, we honor that belief, not just by giving, but by listening, by creating opportunities where none existed before. And none of this would have happened without the person standing next to me, Mrs. Lena Ward. Applause filled the room. Lena glanced at him, surprised, her eyes shining. Ethan looked back, and in that moment, no cameras, no journalists, no board members mattered. It was a moment of truth between two people who had walked through fire and found their way out together. After the event, as the guests dispersed and the staff began cleaning up, Ethan and Lena stepped outside. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, painting the pavement gold. "You did well," she said softly. "So did you," he replied. "This was your vision." "Oh, maybe," she said, "but you gave it the strength to stand." They walked in silence for a few moments, the city sounds blending around them. Then Ethan stopped and turned to face her. "You know, I used to think legacy was about keeping something from being lost, but now I think it is about making sure something continues to grow. You taught me that." Lena smiled faintly. "And you taught me that love does not have to come easy to be real." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Then maybe this is what real looks like." The light around them softened. the noise of the city faded into the background. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow the world, reduced to the warmth of two hands, intertwined, and the quiet certainty that they had built something that could last. As they began walking again, Lena glanced at him with a teasing smile. "So what happens next, Mr. Ward?" Ethan looked ahead, his voice calm but sure. "Whatever we choose." And with that, they continued down the sunlit street. Two people who had turned a contract into a story, and a story into something that finally felt like home. The weeks following the Foundation's new launch unfolded in a rhythm that felt almost too steady to be real. For the first time since the day their paths had crossed, Ethan and Lena moved through life without the shadows of contracts, expectations, or unspoken fears. The world saw them as a couple united by purpose, but inside the walls of the Ward estate, something far simpler had taken root, an everyday kind of peace neither of them had ever known. Each morning began with quiet conversation over coffee in the garden, the air carrying the faint scent of blooming lilies. Ethan would read the news aloud, pausing only to share a wry comment that made Lena laugh. She, in turn, would bring her sketchbook to the table, filling its pages with glimpses of the world around them, the twisted vines on the gate, the outline of sunlight across his face, the small domestic moments that no one else ever saw. But even peace, Lena realized, comes with questions. One afternoon, while Ethan was in the city meeting with investors, Lena visited the art studio again. The walls were lined with new canvases, each one capturing pieces of their shared journey. In one, she had painted the night of the charity gala. In another, the rooftop garden where she had chosen to stay. Each painting felt like a memory preserved, but one canvas remained blank. She stood before it for a long time, brush in hand, unsure what to create next. The emptiness of it mirrored her own uncertainty. What happens when the story you never meant to begin turns into the life you never expected to love? The door creaked softly behind her. "Mrs." Dalton stepped in, wiping her hands on her apron. "That one looks like it's waiting for something special," she said kindly. "Maybe it is," Lena replied. "Or maybe I am." The older woman smiled knowingly. "You have changed this house, Mrs. Ward." He laughs now. He walks through these halls as if they belong to him again. "But he only does that because of you." Lena's voice was quiet. "Sometimes I wonder if I changed him, or if he just remembered who he was." Mrs. Dalton chuckled softly. "Perhaps both. But I will tell you this, whatever you brought back into his life, it was not something that could be signed on paper." Lena looked at the blank canvas again, her heart heavy with gratitude and something close to fear. "Maybe that is what scares me," she said, "that now it is real." That evening, Ethan returned home later than usual. He found her still in the studio, sitting on the edge of a stool, the last light of day turning her hair to gold. "You have been here all day," he said, leaning against the doorway. "I could not decide what to paint next," she admitted. He stepped closer, his voice warm. "Maybe you do not need to decide. Maybe you just need to let it happen." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you would have never said a few months ago." He laughed quietly. "A few months ago, I was too busy pretending control was the same as strength." Lena looked at him, her tone softer now. "And what do you believe now?" "That strength is choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave," he said. The simplicity of his words silenced her. Then, after a moment, she whispered, "So you are staying." "I never planned to go anywhere," he said. "But I would like to know if you are." She met his gaze, her heart steady this time. "I already made that choice." Ethan walked closer until they stood only inches apart. "Then maybe it is time to stop looking back," he said gently. "We have spent so long surviving the past that we forgot how to live in what comes next." Lena nodded slowly. "Then let us start with something new." "What would that be?" he asked. She glanced at the blank canvas. "Something without a plan. Just us." Ethan smiled. "Then let us make that our future." They spent the rest of the evening in the studio, side by side. He mixed the paints while she began the first strokes, her movements calm, steady. The painting that took shape was different from all the others, not dramatic, not symbolic, just real. Two figures sitting in the morning light, surrounded by color and silence, at peace. When she finally set the brush down, Ethan looked at the canvas and said quietly, "That feels like home." "It is," she replied, "because it is ours." Later that night, as the house settled into its familiar hush, Lena walked through the halls alone. The portraits of the Ward family still hung along the staircase, but now they felt less like shadows of expectation and more like witnesses to something new. In the study, she found Ethan asleep at his desk, papers scattered beside an open folder labeled Ward Foundation Expansion Plan. She smiled, draped a blanket over his shoulders and whispered, "Rest. Tomorrow can wait." "Oh?" When she returned to her room, she opened her sketchbook and wrote one line beneath the last drawing. Some stories do not end when the contract does. Some just begin again, freely. The clock ticked softly in the distance, and outside, the wind stirred the garden leaves. The life they had once built out of necessity had become something much greater, something chosen, something lived, something true. Winter came quietly that year, settling over the Ward estate with a soft grace. The gardens were bare now, the trees stripped of color, their branches reaching skyward like quiet sentinels. Inside, the mansion was warm, filled with the scent of cedar and the faint hum of a fireplace that seemed to burn just a little brighter these days. Lena stood by the tall window of the south wing, watching snow fall across the fields. Each flake drifted slowly, deliberately, like the world had decided to move at a gentler pace. Behind her, the painting she and Ethan had finished together hung proudly on the wall. It had become the heart of the house, simple, unguarded, and alive with light. Ethan entered the room carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. "You are awake early," he said, handing one to her. "I could not sleep," she admitted. The snow was too beautiful to ignore. He smiled faintly. "You sound like my mother. She used to wake up before dawn just to watch the first snowfall." She said it reminded her that even endings could be beautiful. Lena looked at him, her expression soft. "She sounds like someone who understood life better than most." "She did," he said quietly. "And for the first time, I think I finally understand her." They stood in silence for a while, sipping coffee, the warmth from the cups spreading through their hands. The world outside was still, a perfect contrast to the chaos that had once defined their lives. After breakfast, they drove into the city for the Foundation's year-end review meeting. It was the first time Lena would present her own report as director of the new Ward Arts Initiative, a program that had grown faster than anyone expected. Under her guidance, the Foundation had launched workshops, scholarships, and exhibitions across several schools. What had started as a simple idea had become one of the most celebrated community efforts of the year. When they arrived, the boardroom buzzed with quiet admiration. Lena, once the outsider in Ethan's world, now stood as his equal. She presented her progress clearly and passionately, her voice calm but strong. Ethan sat beside her, listening with quiet pride, letting her lead. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. One of the board members, a woman who had been skeptical from the beginning, said, "Mrs. Ward, I think your program has restored something. We lost a sense of humanity in our work. You reminded us that the heart of this foundation is not just charity, it is connection." Lena smiled humbly. "That is all I ever wanted it to be." After the meeting, as they stepped outside into the brisk winter air, Ethan looked at her with quiet admiration. "You realize you just outshone every member of that room, including me," he said. She laughed softly. "You are just saying that." "Oh, no," he replied. "I am stating a fact. You are what this foundation was missing." Her smile faded slightly. "It was missing more than that, Ethan. It was missing you." He met her eyes, his tone gentle. "Maybe it was waiting for us both." They drove back to the estate as snow continued to fall. By the time they arrived, the grounds were blanketed in white. The house looked like something out of a dream, peaceful and alive. "Mrs. Dalton met them at the door with her usual quiet smile. "The house looks brighter when you two come home together," she said warmly. Lena laughed. "It might just be the snow." "No," the older woman said. "It is not the snow." Later that evening, Ethan found Lena in the library, surrounded by stacks of books and old ledgers from the Foundation. She was reviewing a file when he leaned against the doorway, watching her with quiet amusement. "Do you ever stop working?" he asked. "Do you?" she countered. He smiled. "Fair point. But there is something I wanted to show you." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Maybe," he said, his tone teasing. "Come on." He led her through the hallway, past the staircase, and into a small room she had never seen before. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, and in the center stood a piano covered in a thin layer of dust. "This was my mother's," Ethan said quietly. "She used to play every Sunday morning. After she passed, I could not bring myself to come in here." Lena ran her fingers gently along the keys, pressing one. The soft, fragile note filled the room. "It still works." Ethan nodded. "I had it restored last week. I thought maybe it was time this house had music again." She smiled. "You mean it is time for life to come back?" "Something like that," he said. Lena sat down and began to play softly. It was a simple melody, one she had learned long ago. Ethan stood beside her, his gaze distant but peaceful. The notes filled the space between them, warm and fragile, wrapping around memories that had once hurt too much to touch. When she stopped, the room fell into silence again. Ethan placed his hand over hers on the piano keys. "I think she would have liked you," he said quietly. Lena looked up at him. "I hope so. She would have," he said with certainty. "You remind me of her, strong, kind, and endlessly patient." She smiled softly. "I am not sure about the patient part." He chuckled. "Maybe not, but you are all the other things, and more." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the garden where everything had once begun. The lights of the house reflected on the white ground, casting a gentle glow that made it look like the world had paused for them alone. That night, as they sat together by the fireplace, Lena leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. The sound of the crackling fire filled the room. "Do you ever think about how strange it all was?" she asked quietly. "All the time," he said. "But I also think it was necessary. We had to lose everything we thought mattered to find what really did." Lena nodded. "And what is that?" Ethan turned his head slightly toward her. "You." The firelight flickered across their faces, soft and golden. Outside, the snow thickened, falling endlessly into the night. Inside, the warmth held steady. For the first time since fate had tangled their lives together, neither of them was running anymore. They had stopped trying to prove, to fix, to control. They simply existed, two people who had built something lasting not from power or pretense, but from patience, forgiveness, and quiet faith. And as the fire burned low, Lena thought of how far they had come from strangers bound by paper to partners bound by choice. The contract might have ended long ago, but the promise between them had just begun. Spring returned to the Ward estate with the sound of soft rain and the scent of new blossoms drifting through the garden. The snow that had blanketed everything for months melted into the soil, giving life to rows of lilies that Margaret Ward had once planted long ago. The mansion, which had once stood cold and echoing, now breathed again alive with laughter, light, and the quiet rhythm of belonging. Lena stood on the veranda that morning, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the trees. The garden below glowed with color. Behind her, the faint sound of piano music carried through the open doors, the melody she had played for Ethan that winter night. It had become a part of their mornings now, a ritual that marked not an ending, but a continuation. Ethan appeared behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You always wake before the sun," he said with a gentle smile. She turned toward him. "Someone has to make sure it rises." He chuckled, setting the cups on the railing. "You always know how to make me believe in impossible things." "It is not impossible," she said softly. "You just had to stop trying to control everything." Ethan leaned beside her, his gaze on the horizon. "You taught me that. You taught me that love and leadership are not about control, they are about trust." The sound of distant bells echoed from the small village beyond the estate. It was the day of the Foundation's spring benefit, an event that had grown to become the most meaningful of the year. For the first time, the entire program would be dedicated not to donors or shareholders, but to the children and communities it served. As the morning unfolded, the estate filled with guests, families, students, teachers, and volunteers. The garden was transformed into a festival of art and laughter. Canvases lined the pathways, displaying works from the Foundation's schools. Lena moved among the crowd, smiling at the children who proudly explained their paintings. Ethan watched from a distance, his hands in his pockets, a quiet satisfaction on his face. He had spent years building empires, but nothing compared to seeing this a legacy of compassion instead of control. One of the children, a small girl with a paintbrush tucked behind her ear, tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Ward, Mrs. Ward said you helped build all this. Is it true? Ethan crouched to meet her eyes. I think she is the one who built it. I just made sure she had the space to do it. The girl grinned. Then you are both builders. He laughed softly. Maybe we are. As the day turned to afternoon, Ethan joined Lena near the stage where the final presentation was about to begin. The crowd quieted as she took the microphone. Her voice steady but warm. When I first walked into this world, I did not belong here, she said. I was a stranger trying to find a way to survive. But what I discovered was that belonging is not something anyone can give you. It is something you create together. This foundation stands for that truth. It stands for second chances and the courage to start again. The audience erupted in applause. Ethan stood a few steps behind her, pride softening every line of his face. When she turned to look at him, their eyes met briefly, a wordless conversation that said everything they had both learned. After the ceremony, as the guests began to leave, Ethan and Lena walked together through the garden. The sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The air was filled with the hum of distant laughter and the faint rustle of wind through the flowers. This feels like the ending to a long story, Lena said quietly. Ethan shook his head. It feels like the start of a new one. She smiled. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we had not signed that contract? He looked at her thoughtfully. Every day. But then I remember fate does not always hand us love wrapped in perfection. Sometimes, it begins as a mistake that teaches us who we are meant to become. Lena's expression softened. Then maybe the mistake was the most important thing that ever happened to us. Maybe it was never a mistake at all, he said. Just a fated detour. Oh. They reached the pond at the center of the garden, the water reflecting the orange glow of sunset. Ethan turned toward her, taking her hands in his. Lena. I have spent years signing papers and contracts that tied me to things that never mattered. I do not ever want us to be something that depends on signatures again. I just want to live this life with you, freely. Her fingers tightened around his. Then let us promise each other no contracts, no conditions, just choice. He smiled softly. Just choice. The wind carried a gentle fragrance of lilies across the water as the sun dipped below the trees. The first evening stars appeared above the estate, glimmering faintly against the deepening sky. In the distance, laughter drifted from the garden where the last few guests lingered. The world moved on, but for Ethan and Lena, time seemed to slow. They stood in the fading light, surrounded by everything they had built together, not through wealth or power, but through patience, compassion, and the courage to change. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, the lights inside glowed like a promise. Behind them, the foundation banner fluttered softly in the breeze, the words printed across it catching the last shimmer of daylight. Hope is not given, it is built. Oh, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan and Lena Ward knew that what they had built together was not just hope, it was home.